The man picked up the mysterious liquid beneath him and poured it all into a makeshift filter nearby. With continuous manual pressing, the liquid flowed through a series of devices, quickly transforming into fresh water, which collected at the faucet and streamed into a cup. He carefully patted the filter, making sure not to waste a single drop. Under the scorching sun, the mariner eagerly took a sip, savoring the sensation as his parched mouth was fully hydrated, and then swallowed with visible satisfaction. To his surprise, the second sip of precious freshwater swirled around his mouth but was then poured onto a potted plant. This was the world of the year 2500, where melting polar ice caps had submerged the Earth, turning it into a vast ocean. Humanity now lived on artificial floating islands instead of land. In such harsh conditions, freshwater and potted plants, essential for preventing scurvy, had become rare and invaluable resources. After quenching his thirst and watering the plant, the mariner's boat suddenly shook violently. Thinking he had caught something valuable, he hurried to the cabin to grab his gear. He dove into the water, only to retrieve two mismatched shoes and a useless lighter. Adding to his misfortune, while he was diving, someone stole his carefully cultivated citrus plant and taunted him with it. The mariner immediately hoisted his sails, chasing after the thief at full speed. The thief's boat was eventually destroyed, and the thief himself met his end at the hands of pirates. With his revenge complete, the mariner continued sailing for a few days and arrived at an artificial floating atoll. Running low on supplies, he urgently needed to trade the items he had collected. Unfortunately, the atoll wasn't trading that day and demanded that the mariner leave immediately. At that moment, the mariner held up a jar containing something even more valuable than freshwater soil. Most people had lived their entire lives on the water, and land was nothing more than a myth to them. When the guards saw the soil, their attitude changed instantly, and they opened the gates to welcome him inside. Even the wealthiest man on the atoll had only heard of soil but had never seen it. During the trade, the man cautiously picked up a pinch of soil and tasted it. His expression confirmed that the mariner's soil was genuine. With its quality assured, the mariner began making steep demands. After some tough negotiation, he traded 2 kilograms of soil for over 100 portions of fresh water and a precious tomato plant to help prevent scurvy during long voyages. As he was about to leave, the atoll residents surrounded him. The mariner assumed they wanted to detain him and repeatedly refused. To his surprise, they only wanted to borrow his jeans, pushing a young woman toward him. Over the decades, most atoll residents had become related by blood, and inbreeding had led to severe genetic defects in their offspring. Without new bloodlines, they faced the threat of extinction, so they desperately needed an outsider. However, the mariner wasn't interested in the woman and flatly refused their request. He thought this would allow him to leave safely, but his lack of interest in the woman raised suspicion. No solitary sailor could suppress such desires unless they were a spy sent by pirates. Eager to leave because of a mission, the elder in the crowd blew a horn, ordering the guards to detain the mariner. Faced with the threat of forced reproduction, the mariner refused to comply and quickly clashed with the guards. During the struggle, the guards accidentally discovered the mariner's secret. Learning that the mariner was a mutant, the atoll residents were shocked. Though his mutations were caused by prolonged life at sea, the residents viewed him as a monster. Their fear and prejudice led them to decide he must be captured at all costs. The mariner refused to surrender, diving into the sea to escape, but he was soon caught in a fishing net and dragged ashore. During the scuffle, the mariner had killed someone in self-defense, so the elder decided he would be executed the next day. On the atoll, the elder's word was law, and he didn't care about the mariner's reasons. The unlucky mariner was locked in a hanging cage, forced to watch helplessly as others took his prized shoes. Not all the atoll residents shared the elder's views. However, a woman named Helen strongly opposed the mariner's execution. She argued that he might hold valuable secrets and should be interrogated, as he could provide unexpected benefits. Helen's interest, in truth, stemmed from her desire to learn about the mythical land. Although Earth had been submerged for many years, Helen had only heard of land and legends, yet she firmly believed it truly existed. Her conviction stemmed from an event 6 years ago when her adopted daughter Enola floated to the atoll in a basket that contained soil, proving to Helen that land must exist somewhere unknown. The soil that mariner traded today further confirmed her belief. Then there was the mysterious pattern on Enola's back. Helen suspected it might be a map to land and believed that unlocking its secrets would lead them there. However, Helen's logical reasoning failed to change the elder's mind and almost cost Enola her life. Seeing this, Helen gave up her insistence and ran across the atoll. Besides her, another person who strongly believed in the existence of land was Gregor, the seemingly eccentric but incredibly intelligent scholar. While everyone else was caught up in heated discussions, Gregor secretly approached Mariner. During their interaction, he accidentally discovered that, in addition to gills, Mariner's legs had evolved webbed feet. Gregor pulled out the pattern taken from Enola's back and asked Mariner if he knew what it meant. Realizing this was his chance to escape, Mariner struck a deal with Gregor. If he unlocked the cage, Mariner would reveal where the soil came from. Although Gregor was desperate to learn the truth, he wasn't bold enough to go against the entire atoll community. Unfortunately, at that moment, the guards responsible for the atoll's security noticed Gregor, forcing him to leave. Mariner couldn't believe that what began as a simple trade for supplies had turned into a fight for his life. Soon, dawn broke over the atoll once more. According to the decision made at the meeting the night before, Mariner was to be executed. However, given the scarcity of resources, the elder decided to drown him in the waste pit so that his decomposed body could be turned into fertilizer. But just as this was about to happen, pirates launched an attack on the atoll. With their superior weaponry and numbers, the pirates were a terrifying force to be reckoned with. Hearing the alarm, the guards scrambled to organize a defense. At first, everyone believed the atoll's gates were strong enough to hold off the pirates. However, the pirate leader was cunning. He surrounded the atoll, cutting off all escape routes, and unleashed heavy firepower. Under the relentless assault, the atoll was quickly reduced to ruins. Some pirates used planes and tow lines to surf their way into the atoll's interior. As the atoll neared collapse, Gregor began gathering his belongings, preparing to leave. He had previously planned with Helen and assembled a hot air balloon for escape. In his haste, Gregor accidentally triggered the launch mechanism. As the balloon began to ascend, Gregor shouted Helen's name, but it was already too late. By the time Helen and Enola arrived, Gregor had already floated away in the hot air balloon. Meanwhile, trapped in his cage, Mariner was desperately trying to free himself. The harder he struggled, the deeper he sank, until only his hands were visible above the waist. At that moment, Helen arrived. With Gregor gone and only Mariner left to rely on for her and Enola's survival, Helen decided to cooperate with him. After striking a deal, Helen broke the cage lock and freed Mariner. Assessing the situation, Mariner instructed Helen to open the atoll's gates while he dove into the water, taking the opportunity to clean himself. After locating his ship, Mariner surfaced quickly and began fighting the surrounding pirates. Initially, he managed to hold his own, but as more pirates joined the fight, he started to struggle. Fortunately, Helen successfully opened the atoll gates. Seeing this, Mariner raised his sails and sped through the opening. Despite some difficulties, they managed to escape. The pirate leader, however, was furious. Letting Mariner and the others escape would ruin his reputation. He immediately ordered his men to attack, but Mariner was no pushover. Handing the wheel over to Helen, he moved to the stern of the boat. Aiming at an attacking pirate ship, Mariner fired his harpoon. Afterward, Mariner used the tension of the harpoon line to redirect the pirate ship's firepower, aiming it directly at the pirate leader's vessel. If it had been anyone else, they might have realized what was happening, but the pirate firing the weapon was a dimwit. As a result, the bullets ended up hitting their own crew. A black mushroom cloud rose above the sea, and the waters finally grew calm again. Though the pirate leader managed to jump ship in time, he lost an eye in the process, becoming a one-eyed man. After successfully taking over the atoll, the pirates began counting the supplies, but that wasn't their primary goal. The pirate leader's sudden attack on the atoll was actually about Enola, or more specifically, the mysterious pattern on her back. It turned out the pirate leader also believed in the existence of the legendary dryland. With his pirate crew growing in numbers, the resources and fuel they needed for survival were nearly depleted. Desperate, the pirate leader launched a costly assault on the atoll to capture Enola and decode the secrets of her back tattoo. However, he sacrificed his eye and many crew members, only to learn that Enola had escaped with the Mariner. On the other side, the Mariner and his companions, having fled the atoll, weren't in great shape either. The limited supply of fresh water and food on board wasn't enough for 3 people, forcing them to ration heavily. Although Mariner repeatedly claimed the soil he traded was a lucky find, Helen didn't believe him. She was convinced he held secrets and kept pestering him to take her to Dryland. Feeling cornered, Mariner reluctantly admitted he knew where Dryland was and agreed to take Helen there on one condition: Enola had to leave the boat. He didn't want to drag along a child on such a journey, but Helen refused, insisting that, though not biologically related, she and Enola were like mother and daughter. To persuade Mariner, Helen took off her necklace and, in desperation, even offered her body. Seeing her determination, Mariner tentatively reached out but ultimately refrained from taking things further, claiming he wasn't interested. He turned her down but also stopped insisting on Enola leaving the boat. However, Mariner's patience wore thin. Used to sailing alone, the sudden presence of a woman and a chatty child made him uncomfortable. Even when Enola kissed him on the cheek in gratitude, Mariner reacted as if electrocuted, pushing her away. Mariner and Enola's relationship resembled that of bickering companions, while Mariner preferred silence. Enola's chatter never ceased, and her endless talking finally pushed him over the edge one day. By the time Helen arrived after hearing the commotion, she found Enola had been thrown into the sea. Furious, Helen slapped Mariner, who felt frustrated. He initially planned to leave the two behind but ultimately couldn't bring himself to abandon them, stopping the boat to let them back on board. As Helen prepared to confront Mariner, she spotted a plane sent by the pirate leader approaching in the distance. With the sails down, escaping was impossible. The trio had to improvise. Hiding behind the canvas and moving cautiously, the pirate plane circled the boat twice and was about to leave when Enola, thinking it was a rescue, waved her hand. Exposing their position, the pirates opened fire, spraying bullets everywhere. Seeing himself caught like a sitting duck, Mariner's temper flared. He stormed back to the cabin to prepare weapons. However, Helen, misunderstanding his intentions, thought he was abandoning them, calling him a coward. She decided to handle the situation herself. Helen grabbed a harpoon gun at the stern, and despite having no prior experience, she successfully hit the plane on her first attempt. By the time Mariner realized what had happened, it was too late. The harpoon line had tethered the boat to the plane, forcing it to circle the boat repeatedly. If this continued, they were all doomed. Mariner climbed the mast to cut the rope connecting the two. Before he could, the pirates severed it themselves. Unwilling to die, back on the boat, Mariner's frustration was evident. Since meeting Helen and Enola, his beloved ship had been damaged multiple times. Taking out his anger, Mariner pushed Helen down, took out his knife, and angrily cut her hair, issuing a stern warning. Meanwhile, the surviving pirates reported Mariner's location to the pirate leader, having learned from their previous encounter. The pirate leader knew Mariner wasn't an easy target. He decided to devise a flawless plan to capture all three. It had been over 10 days since they fled the atoll. During this time, Helen and Enola had gone without proper food, and the little water they had was filtered from their urine. Desperate with hunger, Helen and Enola watched as Mariner plucked a tomato from the plant he'd traded for earlier. To their dismay, Mariner leisurely sliced the juicy tomato with his knife, savoring its sweet and tangy flavor right in front of them. Helen and Enola could only watch, their eyes filled with longing, hoping for a shred of compassion. Helen thought Mariner might share the last tomato with them, but she was wrong. Mariner devoured the entire tomato, licking the juice clean off his fingers, leaving nothing for them. Realizing they couldn't rely on him, Helen decided to take matters into her own hands. She found an old fishing rod on the boat and attempted to catch some fish, but Mariner snatched it away and tossed it into the sea. He warned Helen not to be foolish. The fish here weren't easy to catch. Enola, however, wouldn't take this lying down. She and Helen teamed up, loudly complaining and arguing with Mariner. Annoyed by the racket, Mariner gave in, knowing he wouldn't get peace until they ate. He retrieved his gear from below deck and used himself as bait, returning with a generous haul of fish in the most unexpected way. After days of hunger, Helen and Enola devoured the food ravenously, yet even with full stomachs, Enola's chatter didn't stop. She curiously admired Mariner's webbed feet, expressing envy and wishing she were a mutant too. Enola thought that if she were a mutant, she could learn to swim and no longer be called a freak. Hearing that Enola couldn't swim shocked Mariner. In a world covered by water, it was rare for anyone not to know how to swim. Mariner couldn't help but wonder if Enola really came from dryland. However, he couldn't figure out how she ended up here. As night fell over the sea, Helen approached Mariner, seizing the moment to share her thoughts. She handed him a cloth with a drawing Enola had made of 3 small figures. Though reluctant to admit it, Mariner recognized the figures as the 3 of them. The cool and gentle sea breeze seemed to stir something in Mariner's lonely heart. After this, Mariner's relationship with Enola changed dramatically. He no longer minded her endless talking and even began teaching her how to swim. The sight of them playing in the water filled Helen with warmth, giving her a new perspective on Mariner. Not long after, they came across a trade outpost. Because his boat was severely damaged, Mariner was desperate for repairs, but no one responded to his calls. It was then that both Mariner and Helen noticed something was off. First, there was black oil floating on the water surface. Second, the people at the outpost were waving stiffly. Using the boat's periscope, Mariner discovered pirates hiding underwater. It turned out this was Deacon's plan all along. He had predicted their route would take them past the outpost and had taken over the location in advance. The stiffly waiting figures were actually corpses. Deacon had manipulated the dead to wave as a trap to lower Mariner's guard and capture him. What Deacon hadn't expected was Mariner's sharp instincts. Upon seeing the oil on the water, Mariner quickly uncovered the ploy. Knowing he couldn't win in a direct confrontation, Mariner turned his boat around and fled. Frustrated that his plan hadn't gone as expected, Deacon immediately ordered his forces to mobilize. At the signal, pirates emerged from underwater, armed with nets to surround Mariner. However, Mariner's strength and quick thinking turned the tables. The nets ended up capturing the pirates themselves, infuriating Deacon, who decided to take matters into his own hands. Despite losing his left eye, the experienced pirate leader managed to shoot Mariner in the left side of his waist, declaring it his compensation for his missing eye. Spotting Mariner injured through his binoculars, Deacon sent out a tracker shark, knowing that no one could escape the scent of blood. After a quick bandage, Helen and Mariner began to argue. Mariner had finally realized why the pirates were relentlessly chasing them. It wasn't him they were after. The true target was Enola, for the mysterious map tattooed on her back. Mariner grabbed Helen by the neck, demanding she stop lying and tell him the truth. Choked, Helen had no choice but to reveal everything she knew. Mariner was speechless. He couldn't believe anyone could be foolish enough to trust in something they'd never seen. Helen, on the other hand, felt conflicted. If dryland didn't exist, where did Mariner's soil, reflective mirrors, and music box come from? Her emotions ran high, her obsession with finding dryland driving her to cling to any possibility. Seeing her desperation, Mariner decided not to argue further. If Helen wanted to see dryland, he'd show her. To do so, Mariner tossed a makeshift plastic oxygen mask into the water and had Helen climb inside. Together, they dove into the depths of the ocean. With the glow of a burning flare, Helen finally saw her surroundings, a world filled with the remnants of a past civilization. This was what remained of humanity's cities before the polar ice caps melted. Towering skyscrapers submerged and forgotten over centuries. At the seabed, Mariner grabbed a handful of soil and showed it to Helen. Helen didn't respond. She understood now. This was the dryland she had dreamed of. When Mariner and Helen resurfaced, the pirates, who had been chasing them, closed in, using their lives as leverage. The pirates demanded Enola reveal herself. In her innocent belief that surrendering would save Helen and Mariner, Enola stepped out from hiding. Predictably, after capturing Enola, Deacon ordered his men to kill Mariner and Helen before the pirates could act. Mariner hoisted one of their guards into the air and escaped into the water with Helen. Thanks to Mariner's advanced swimming abilities, they avoided the hail of bullets. There was no fear of drowning either. Mariner's gills allowed them to breathe underwater like fish. Through a shared breath, Mariner kept Helen alive until they outlasted the surface pirates, who were left with nothing but the smoldering wreckage of their ship. As they floated in the aftermath, Helen asked Mariner a question that had lingered in her mind. Why had he rejected her advances after escaping the atoll? Without hesitation, Mariner gave the answer that had been in his heart all along. Because you didn't want it for yourself. Helen was stunned. In a world where a single scrap of old newspaper could be traded for 6 women, she hadn't expected anyone to respect her agency. Overwhelmed, she kissed him, and they embraced tightly, but the moment of joy was short-lived. As Helen remembered that Enola was still in danger, with their boat destroyed, they were stranded. At that moment, a voice called out from above. It was Gregor, who had spotted the smoke from their burning ship and came to their rescue. That night, gathered with the other atoll survivors, tension lingered. Although everyone knew the pirates were to blame, the stubborn residents pinned the root cause on Enola, and Mariner. One was a freak, the other a mutant. After careful analysis, Gregor was certain that rescuing Enola and decoding the map on her back would lead them to dryland. However, the residents refused to take the risk. Having survived once, none of them wanted to gamble their lives again. Unable to connect with the others, Mariner returned to the wreckage of his boat, hoping to salvage anything useful. There, he discovered one of Enola's drawings, which matched the symbols in Gregor's book perfectly. This revelation planted a new idea in Mariner's mind. Maybe dryland hadn't been entirely lost. Meanwhile, Gregor's brainstorming led him to realize the mysterious markings on Enola's back were likely geographic coordinates, latitude and longitude. With this breakthrough, Mariner fueled up a jet ski and followed the oil trail toward the pirate stronghold to rescue Enola. As dawn broke, Mariner emerged from the mist to see the pirates' base, an enormous cruise ship. Over centuries, the ship had become the pirates' headquarters. To maintain control, Deacon had established a cult-like following, with his growing band of pirates, but their expansion came at a cost, dwindling resources and fuel. Desperate, Deacon sought dryland as the solution to his problems. Days turned into years, but his dream of living luxuriously remained out of reach. Because his authority was being questioned, someone in the pirate crew began stirring unrest among the ranks. Even though the map's secret hadn't been decoded, Deacon had no choice but to bring Enola forward to stabilize his crew. Under Deacon's manipulative speech, the pirates regained their morale, returning to their posts with the promise of reaching the resource-rich dryland. In truth, even Deacon himself had no idea where they were headed. Soon, dozens of oars extended from the base of the cruise ship. Accompanied by unified chants, the ship, dormant for centuries, finally began to move. At that moment, a determined figure appeared on the deck. It was Mariner. The sight of their nemesis filled both sides with rage, each eager to eliminate the other. At first, Deacon was confident. After all, they were on his turf, but his confidence faltered when he saw Mariner holding a lit flare above the ship's fuel intake. Deacon's tone immediately softened. If that flare went in, his entire base would be obliterated. Deacon tried to reason that Mariner wouldn't actually do something so reckless. Unfortunately for him, he guessed wrong. Mariner released the flare, letting it fall straight into the fuel tank. Within seconds, the ship exploded. Furious, Deacon sent all his best men after Mariner while attempting to escape with Enola in a plane. But Mariner wasn't an ordinary man. The crew was no match for him. Seeing Deacon trying to flee, Mariner used a zipline, anchoring himself to the ship, and made a daring move to intercept the pirate leader. Mariner picked up a steel cable, connected it to the anchor, and at the perfect moment, threw it at the plane as it flew by, rendering it useless. Worried for Enola's safety, Mariner rushed to the wreckage, relieved to find she had only suffered minor scratches. Just then, Helen and the others arrived overhead in the hot air balloon. Spotting Mariner and Enola below, Helen quickly lowered a rope, but Deacon, still alive, grabbed it and climbed after them. With Enola and Helen's combined effort, they managed to knock Deacon into the water. But Deacon wasn't done yet. Furious, he pulled out a gun and shot Enola, causing her to fall from the rope. As she was about to fall back into the pirate's grasp, Mariner revealed his full strength. Tying the rope around his feet, he dove from the balloon, catching Enola mid-air, and quickly returned to safety. The sheer audacity and skill of Mariner's actions left the pirates in awe, momentarily distracting them as they collided with one another. Once Enola was safely aboard, Gregor examined the inverted map on her back and finally cracked its meaning. According to Gregor's calculations, heading in the opposite direction would lead them straight to dryland. Nobody knew how long they had been flying, but just as their freshwater supply ran dry, they saw hope. Awoken by the sound of seabirds, they looked into the distance and saw something they'd only ever heard of in myths: a mountain range. The peaks that pierced the clouds were mysterious and ethereal, while the base was lush, green, and full of life. The group landed quickly, marveling at the abundance of freshwater resources that once seemed unattainable. Waterfalls cascaded from the mountaintop, and trees so wide they couldn't be embraced towered above them, leaving Mariner and the others in awe. As they explored, they discovered traces of past human life. In one house, they found 2 skeletal remains lying on a bed. The notes left behind revealed they were Enola's parents, knowing they wouldn't survive. They sent Enola away with the map on her back, hoping someone would one day find Dryland and continue the human legacy. Everyone was filled with excitement and relief, realizing this place was far more suitable for human survival than the ocean, but Mariner felt out of place. Dryland was vast and unfamiliar, and the stillness unnerved him. Even a passing wild horse startled him. Mariner realized that his body, adapted for the ocean, no longer felt entirely human. He admitted, "It's hard not to feel sad." Fighting back his emotions, he approached Enola to say goodbye. For once, the usually talkative child was silent. Understanding his resolve, Enola said nothing. Instead, she handed him her music box, kissed his cheek, and ran off. Unable to watch him leave, separation was painful for both the child and the adult. Helen, who had grown close to Mariner, also didn't want him to leave, but love sometimes means making the right choice. Helen realized that letting him go was the best way to honor their bond if staying wouldn't bring him happiness. After a final kiss, Mariner set off in a small boat, leaving Dryland behind. Helen and Enola stood atop the mountain, watching his figure disappear over the horizon. It was then they noticed a plaque beneath their feet, naming this land Mount Everest. Along with the name of its first climber, humanity's story hadn't ended, and the future remained unwritten, full of endless possibilities. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.